was doing was wrong. Now, a key issue when you think about the ethics of whistleblowing, and again about the ethics of media disclosure, is, well, how do I, media is sort of easier. You don't have to know whether the government was right or wrong. You just want to get the information out there. But if in Dan's case, he had to think about, well, how do I know that? Why is my view on why the government is wrong better than their view? And I think one way that whistleblower law takes account of that question is to say, well, the first thing you should do is go through channels. And you did that in talking to Fulbright. You found a kind of channel that discounts your own judgment and makes sure that what you're saying, I'm justified in this because those guys are wrong, is really correct.
You would have been, potentially you would have been convicted under the Espionage Act had not the plumbers.
No, let me comment on that, because I do have an unusual, I'm a layman here, not like my classmate Bob Cole is a law professor, I'm a defendant. But I do have an expensive education in this because I was the first person ever prosecuted for a leak of classified information in this country. I found that very few lawyers or judges or journalists actually are aware of that. My prosecution with Tony Russo was as unprecedented as the attempt to join the press earlier on the Pentagon Papers as a civil action. So,
you weren't incarcerated, right? I mean, the Nixon administration.
No, I was out on bond after the day.
Right.
And it's not clear to me, Judge Advocate General, people in the military, don't they ever get bail? Or is it always the case that you're put in jail while you're awaiting prosecution?
No, it's not always the case.
So why is Manning being let alone?
That's what I said. I don't know the answer to that.
But there are statutes in the uniform.
Okay, well anyway.
He violated orders.
And anyway, I was
because of military discipline. I don't know.
I was just trying to contrast it with the Obama administration. The Nixon administration did not incarcerate you. The Obama administration not only is incarcerating Bradley Manning, but also is doing more investigations and prosecutions under leaking related to the Espionage Act than any administration in the history of the United States.
You're right, and you're right, and not many people are so aware of that.
Right, there's 150 FBI agents and prosecutors assigned to a special unit in the National Security Division of the Justice Department, which has been revived since 9/11, along with some of the investigators at the Pentagon. So they are understood. The irony here is a liberal Democratic administration is doing, so to self-describe, is doing more prosecutions and incarcerating people, denying bail, keeping them in custody than the Nixon.
Well, that applies to Bradley, but let me expand on that just for a moment. As I said, I was told that I could be prosecuted under 18 U.S.C., commonly known as the Espionage Act, and I said that was true. What I was not told, and of course everyone who signs a secrecy agreement reads that, always. We're talking about millions of people here now. What none of them are told in that document is, prior to mine, what I wasn't told, no one ever had been prosecuted under this for a leak, although leaks occurred every other day or every week to some degree. They were constant. Of course, you didn't always know who the person doing the leak was, but often you did, in fact, in the government. And there had been no prosecutions. I didn't know that. I had a vague sense of it. There's a reason for that. And the reason is this. If you read 793, paragraphs D and E, and E, the unauthorized possessor, giving information to an unauthorized person, is which applies to Bradley Manning. The language of that clearly criminalizes what I did, or what Bradley Manning did, or what any of these leakers did. They are giving classified information or information relating to the national defense, which has been, classified information has been taken as a test of that, that it relates to national defense, to an unauthorized person, a person without a clearance, let's say, who's totally unauthorized to get that, as happens all the time. The problem with that is, so that would seem that we were clearly violating that. The problem is that the act was, the legislative history of that is that it was not intended against, to deal like a British-type official secrets act, as you pointed out.
The precedent.
Even as early as 1917, when the act was passed, the Congress people who were passing on this made a very big point. We're Americans. We have a First Amendment. We have a right to know here. We do not want a British Official Secrets Act. And yet, they did write this language, which seems to apply. So that raises a question, well, what did they mean? Was that an accident, or does it apply or not? The problem with using that as if it were, or as if it is, an Official Secrets Act, is twofold. First of all, it's so broad that it applies not only to the official or the unofficial who gives this information. The wording applies in plain language just as well to the journalists who deal with it, who are unauthorized, and who give it to unauthorized people. And it applies to every one of you if you've read the New York Times, and if you, especially if you possess and retain it, if you haven't taken an effort to return the information to the proper authorities, that's in the language of the Act. In fact, that's one of the things that Thomas Drake was accused of. Let me specifically failure to return. Retaining it, or second, if you shared it with another member of your family, said, look at this article in the New York Times, or if a member of your family read it on your computer screen, you are as guilty of that as the official who gave the information. Now that's pretty broad. And by the way, I noticed that just 2 days ago, I think in the Times, the Defense Department is threatening people in the Defense Department if they show this Guantanamo information to members of their family, the members of the family could be prosecuted. Now that seems, I don't know how many people read that. They say, what in the world are they possibly talking about? The answer is 793 makes that a crime if it does apply to this. So the big question is, in that interpretation, is it constitutional? Going back to what Bob was saying earlier, is giving anything that's classified, whatever it is, of sufficient harm to the country that anybody showing any of that information to anybody else who isn't classified is guilty of a crime. You were asking, should it be subject to prior restraint? That's an even higher restriction. But let's put aside the prior restraint and say, should they be prosecuted? You said I could be convicted. The issue was not whether I could be found guilty of having violated the wording of that act. There was no question about that. But was the act constitutional in that effect? And the reason there were only exactly 3 prosecutions prior to Obama, mine, Samuel Loring Morrison 10 years later, and the APAC case under George W. Bush, which was dropped by Obama. Those were the 3 cases that had ever been prosecuted for leak. And the reason was they were always afraid that if they pressed this forward and it went to the Supreme Court, the act would be found unconstitutional, and it would be revealed what is the case. That Congress has never passed into law, and the law been signed, a British-type Official Secrets Act, which criminalizes all this information. Nearly everyone assumes that we do have such an act. As Lowell said, most countries do. And our mother country, Britain, a democracy, does have that. So people assume that we have it too, as I did when I took these acts. Well, we don't, as a matter of fact. And we shouldn't. That's another separate question, which I think is very important.
There's a lot of focus on whether the leakers did something wrong, but what obligation does the government have here to protect these secrets? Is there...
Well, I think this is the part of the Bradley Manning story that hasn't been reported out. So actually I started to do that just before I came here a couple of days ago. And with that I mean, if you believe the email accounts that were published in Wired magazine, he simply put a CD-ROM into his laptop computer and downloaded the information onto his laptop computer. No one said anything. Security in the offices that he was in was very lax. He ridiculed it in some of the messages, and he was just freely doing it. So if you look back at that issue, there's been very little reporting on it. But it turns out that in 2008, first of all, this is classified information. It's not top secret information that Dan Ellsberg made public or passed on.
It's Obama, by the way, the other day was asked, isn't what Manning did the same as Ellsberg? He said, Obama said now, directly, it's on YouTube, no, what Ellsberg did was, Ellsberg's material was classified in a different way. Yes, it was very much higher. It was top secret, right?
Yeah.
Technically, he was right.
Not to critique the content of the material, but it was historical material that was primarily damaging to Democratic administrations. So there's always been a question of why did the Nixon administration want to protect Johnson and Kennedy? But we won't get into that today. So
They were worried that there was more.
The minute it came out, Nixon's concern was, can we get the Ziem assassination, which implicated John F. Kennedy, out? And he said to Haldeman, he said, the injunction was only to the Times, right? And then Post. So they lost the Times and the Post as a way to get that out. So they got it in a Chicago paper.
So what I was looking at was the question of, wait a second now. These are people dealing with classified information for which this guy is now locked up. There's always this grand jury meeting in the Eastern District of Virginia trying to do additional investigations related to WikiLeaks, how the information got further. But how did the information get out? Who approved the use of these computers and allowed people to download onto a CD? Who's responsible for the lack of security around this material? It turns out that in 2008, there was an order that went out that disabled all of the USB and other ports on government computers with classified information, not because they suspected leaking, but because they were getting viruses into the government system. They allowed the CD-ROM to continue until October of 2010. There is, that is after the Wire material was published. So far, I've been unable to get a confirmation from the Pentagon or the Army about whether there is any internal investigation going on who else leaked, who else downloaded. Did someone from a foreign government get access to the material on their own? What is going on? The unconfirmed information I'm getting back from people who are more familiar with this issue is that the Pentagon is really just totally embarrassed by all of this.
But this is
So I just raise this as a question because if there is a serious security issue here, I think the security issue, which apparently has not been investigated, nor has Congress announced any hearings, is the lack of security that allowed this to happen. Whether you agree with what happened or not, it does not appear that the government had normal security that you would find in almost every major corporation around its proprietary system.
Have they changed any policies since then?
They have changed the policy and instructions as to how to use the CD-ROM. So far, that's all I've seen.
You know, he left out a very nice detail. He didn't just put in a CD-ROM in the thing. That what they were doing was listening. The people who were doing this work were listening to CDs during the day as they listened. So he brought in a CD of Lady Gaga, and he put that into the system to listen to it. He actually downloaded. He made it blank. He erased the Lady Gaga and lip-synced to Lady Gaga while he was actually downloading it.
Well, that's what he described in the emails that were published.
There are different levels.
Was it post-base or what was it?
There are different levels at which the government can screw up, but your question, what should the government think about itself? I mean, you need internal processes for that, and in particular at the top level, you need to have lawyers who are independent, who are not going to just tell you whatever you want to hear, and are going to advise you whether these are good programs or not. And that's part of conscientious internal management.
But may I say, interesting as this question is, that it's kind of a distraction because it implies that there's a major problem here, that the government can't keep its secrets, doesn't keep secrets well enough. The problem is not holes in our secrecy system. In fact, in the terrible disasters we're looking at right now, whether you look at natural ones or 9/11 imposed on us, or the self-inflicted ones where the major victims are foreigners, such as our attack on Iraq, or the escalation of Afghanistan. Which of these disasters was facilitated